When you dare to share, you break the silence. When you dare to share, you speak your truth. When you dare to share, you use the full strength of your voice. When you dare to share, it brings opportunity to own your story. So tell it, be heard, and at the same time, your sharing is someone else's learning, inspiration, motivation, empowerment, and hope. There's always an element to each of our stories that remains a secret. For some, we feel it's a dirty little secret. Dare to share your untold story exposes these secrets in a welcoming and positive way. I encourage each of you out there to dare yourself to share what is yours to tell. When we dare, it is the courage to do something really important. Let this be a vow to each and every single one of us that we take risk, we brave, confront, and face what is, while inspiring and empowering all communities. So let's break that silence and tap into mental beauty. This is Salima Jadavji, your podcast host, a practicing clinical social worker, and your mental wellness connoisseur. Welcome to the Dare to Share Your Untold Story podcast, episode number 13. Demons showed up and they lit a path to her connection and truth. To all my fellow listeners, before we get started, I'm just dropping in a note to give you a heads up that this podcast might be emotionally triggering for you. We do invite guests onto the show who share openly about extremely difficult life moments with exposure and impact of what the struggles have been like. The intensity of each episode could have a variable impact on your emotional and mental well-being based on your own personal story. If at any point the topic becomes uncomfortable or upsetting to you in any way, please do not pressure yourself to listen. Instead, be kind to yourself, do some self-care, and perhaps give another episode a try. Today, I get to speak with Dr. Saira Sabzali. She is a registered clinical counselor with a PhD in transpersonal psychology, and she is certified in creative expression and spiritual guidance. Dr. Saira specializes in managing depression and anxiety symptoms, increasing family harmony, recovering from burnout, and repairing relationships between adult children and their parents. With her team at Dragonfly Wellness Center, Dr. Saira provides mental health support through counseling and coaching, group support, education, and corporate wellness. Dr. Saira has delivered 2 TEDx talks and teaches in the counseling program at Sternberg College. Her podcast, Subsea Life, explores conscious living, and her YouTube channel, Dragonfly Wellness TV, provides free mental health content. Outside of her work, Dr. Saira enjoys reading by the fireplace or watching the trees while sitting on the balcony at her home on the mountains in British Columbia. Hey, Dr. Saira. Welcome to the Dare to Share Your Untold Story podcast.
Thank you so much, Salima. Thank you for having me. It's such a beautiful idea that you have here, and I'm just so honored that you chose me to be one of your guests.
Oh my goodness, thank you. I'm actually so excited that we get to talk to you, or like we as in me, myself, and I get to talk to you. It's so great to have you on the show. I so much appreciate that you're bringing with you your willingness to share and, just the vulnerability that might emerge from this conversation. And then, of course, you're helping me in this stance to break the barriers of mental stigma. So I appreciate that so very much.
Let's do this.
Okay. So, to share with you, Dr. Saira, this podcast is about bringing forward untold stories that people go through, whether directly about a mental health struggle or something else. And so we know that no matter what the story is, there is impact to a person's own mental health in some way, which remains tucked away. So in this platform, it serves a way to break the barriers of mental stigma that have been conditioned in our society. So the presence together of you and I hope, is really to encourage people to share and tell, just as what you're about to do, and share and tell what individuals typically have reluctance for exposing. And of course, to set a new trend, which I like to call mental beauty.
Love it. Love it.
Mental beauty. Yeah, amazing. Okay, ready to dive in?
I am. Let's do this. Let's do this.
Here we go. Give us the newspaper headline of how you would title your untold story.
So if my untold story was a newspaper headline, it would be something like Cinderella before and after the ball.
Cinderella before and after the ball. What does that headline mean to you? Sounds like a really great metaphor.
So it actually came up in a workshop that I was participating in years ago, where I had identified myself as like Cinderella before the ball, right? So kind of like broken, always doing things for other people, not being recognized, not being appreciated. And that was kind of my role in my family and my friend circle. And I just kept playing that out. And then things changed. But in my mind, I was still that person. And so the group facilitator said to me, you're living the Cinderella before the ball. What about Cinderella after the ball? And so that's around, owning your power and owning your beauty and knowing that you could be a princess and knowing that you could have Prince Charming and live happily ever after, right? So as I think about my story, that transition from who I thought I had to be to who I could become, that's the piece for me.
Wow. Who I had to be versus what I can become. Wow. I really like this metaphor. I feel like this is going to be a nice way to bring people's stories together, even in the therapy room. Thank you. That's a really great sharing. So, Dr. Saira, tell us, what is your untold story all about?
So when I was kind of preparing for this with you, Salima, I'll be honest, it was kind of a really emotional process for me, because I tell people that I have depression, but there are parts of my story that I don't necessarily tell. And I think that's the whole point of this podcast, right?
Right, exactly.
And so to think about bringing those pieces here, it feels like terrifying. And yet I know how important it is. So if I were to tell my untold story, the big thing in the last few years has been my depressive episode. And so I've had depression my whole life, but I haven't really wanted to admit to myself that that's true, right? Because I would do different things to kind of manage and cope and, work around. And for a long time, I could tell myself that, oh, it's this life circumstance that's making me feel this way. It's this breakup. It's this whatever. And, when I had this episode, actually, my life felt great. I had just delivered this first TED Talk, and the TED Talk happened to be about inner demons. And so my mom often jokes like, oh yeah, you told everyone else to face their demons. Guess what? You get to face your demons now for the next 3 years. And that's what happened.
That's what she told you?
Yeah, that's what she told me. And and so there was a couple of kind of triggers for me, I guess, for this particular depressive episode that I experienced. And the untold story is the one that I'm going to tell you now.
Okay.
And so my brother, for those who know me well, they know that my brother he's been troubled for many, many, many years, in and out of prison, addicted to drugs, eventually became a drug dealer to maintain his habit or addiction. And I love him, and I've always loved him. And, we have a bond. And I think the thing that was my final straw was that I was here on this TEDx stage, right? My dreams coming true. And about 2 months later, I was back in Calgary, and I went to meet him, and he was homeless and addicted and a little bit paranoid, like he wasn't quite there. And I went to meet him at this McDonald's, and my mom was there, my kids were there, and I just couldn't believe it. It's like my brother was lost somewhere inside this homeless person, right? He smelled like a homeless person. He was kind of talking to himself, and he was like coloring these bandanas that he was going to sell. I bought a bandana from him for $20, and I knew that $20 was going right into his habit. And it was just so heartbreaking. In my mind, that would have been his rock bottom. It wasn't. But in my mind, it was my moment of seeing him at the worst, the saddest place.
Right. That was the worst that you had witnessed.
Exactly.
In him.
Ever. And, I tried to keep it together for him while we were talking. And when we were leaving, I just remember going to the bathroom and just weeping in a stall. Like a movie, right? Just weeping and weeping and trying to do that as quietly as I could. And just feeling like I've lost him. He's gone from me. And I don't know how I'm ever going to get him back. And when I came out of the bathroom, I saw some other people show up, some other homeless people. And he just lit right up, and he was hugging them and high-fiving them. And in that moment, I realized I'm not his family. He has other family now. He has other community. and our worlds are never really going to be the same. Like, it's like in that moment, our paths just went separate. And it had been going that way for a long time, but I guess I never seen it with my own eyes in that way.
Yeah, it's like that moment was kind of like a confirmation that things had changed.
And they would never be my dream, right? It would never be him and I living in that little house in the mountains somewhere, running a retreat center. Like, that's not going to happen.
So you had all that flashing in your mind all at once when you saw him.
In that moment. Yeah, it just, like, all the dreams just shattered. And I think it was either New Year's Eve or the day before New Year's Eve. But I remember I went to this New Year's Eve party either the same day or the next day. And like, I just felt so empty, just so empty. And I remember there was there's this gray toque that I started wearing that day on New Year's Eve. And I just basically kept that toque on for a year. Like, and my family knew, like, when that toque was put on, like, oh, okay, she's not okay. And right. I like, I just like wanted to hide, and I wanted to get away from the pain. And so, and again, like, nothing, I don't think depression is like necessarily based on external factors, but for me, I had been holding it together. And that moment I couldn't anymore. And I couldn't wear the mask anymore of everything's fine and I'm fine.
So like that last straw that holds the camel's back kind of thing.
Absolutely. And about a year before that, I had kind of started looking at the fact that I probably have a food addiction, because his addiction stuff was up. Like, it was up, it was in my face. And I kept like trying to understand and trying to figure it out and not really knowing like what he's doing or why he's doing it. And so I was getting curious about addiction, and I was like reading about it and looking into it. And then I realized I had a food addiction. And so during that year, I faced my food addiction. And what I realized is that I could no longer use food, because I had been using food for decades to numb out my emotions. And suddenly I couldn't do that anymore, because I had changed the way I was eating. And so, like the program that I was on, I was eating 3 meals a day. So I can't eat between meals. And those meals are very particular of what I'm going to eat at those meals, and large quantities, but no sugar, no flour. And so all my comfort foods were unavailable to me. So suddenly this rush of emotion starts coming up, right? Throughout the year, just waves of emotion, and I can't cope with it the way I used to. And then I see him, and then it all falls apart.
Right. So this whole new way of coping, but this was like now the test, and you were probably still recovering and working your program for, focusing on your food regimen and dealing with that. So you might not have fully got accustomed to it.
That's right. And I hadn't found another way yet to cope with intense emotion, right? And I'm a therapist, so you'd think like I know how to do this. I know how to cope with intense emotion. I'm sitting with people's intense emotion all day, right? But
yes, but we are human beings,
Oh my gosh. Yeah. My own. It was so corrosive. And so then I went into about a year or maybe even almost 2 years, trying to figure out medications, trying to stay alive. I mean, I was suicidal. It was just the most awful time of my life. It was so awful. And during that time, some of the time I was putting on a mask and continuing, to function as best as I could and fulfill the obligations that I had. But most of the time I was in bed.
And in all of this that you were going through, were you somehow also continuing to practice as a therapist as well?
Yeah, barely. But yes, I had 2 clients during that time, which for those in private practice know, like, that's not enough to sustain a private practice. But one of the clients, they had come to me and was actively suicidal. And at that point, I also was, and working with my therapist. And I just felt like I can really connect to this person, and I think I maybe can help them. And those 2 clients, honestly, they're the only reason I would get up and shower once a week. Sometimes I wouldn't even shower for the sessions, but generally I would. Right. And, get up and shower and put on my makeup and go to that 1-hour session, and then come back home and fall asleep again. Right. But they are what got me out of bed, honestly. I mean, other things, like I had to drop my kids to school, for example. So I'd get up in my pajamas, I'd drive them to school in my pajamas, I'd come back home, and I'd go to sleep until it was time to pick them up in my pajamas and then come home. And then I'd go to sleep until my husband woke me up for dinner, if he could even get me to eat, and then go back to sleep. Like that was for weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks. That was my routine, except for meeting with these 2 clients.
How did your children cope with that?
Such a good question. I was just looking through some old Facebook posts and, all the different social media posts. And one of the things that I thought was really important was for them to understand what I was going through, because what had happened was just before I'd kind of admitted to myself what was going on, my son started having all of these, like, he just started burst out crying in school for no reason. He was about 7 or 8 years old. And the teacher was concerned, like something's going on. And so I got him into therapy, knowing that something was up. And what I learned was that my mood, like he was making it, he believed that he had done something, and that's why I was so miserable. As children do, right? He thought it was about him.
I wonder.
And so when that came out in therapy, I started talking to them about what was going on. And there's this great book. It's called the Blue Day book for kids. And there's all these different pictures of animals looking sad, and it explains what a blue day is and what a blue month is. And and so I kind of had to take it to their level. And one of the things that we did as a family was we actually went. So the Canadian Mental Health Association has a yearly fundraiser called Ride, Don't Hide. And it's a bike ride, like a 10-kilometer bike ride where you're like, get out there and let everybody know that, yes, I have a mental health issue and I'm still here. And my kids did that with me and another friend. And we called our team the Moody Mamas. Because I was a very moody mama during that period.
What a great team name. It's nice and bold.
Yeah. So I think my kids, like, they hung on. I had to keep reminding them that it wasn't them and that mama was just sick and she wasn't feeling well. That was the best way for them to like a 4-year-old and a 7-year-old. That was the best way to explain it to them. Mama needs to rest. Mama's sick. But it was probably awful. I mean, thank goodness for my husband, because I don't know how we would have got that through that time as parents if it wasn't for him.
Right. Your husband was your backbone at the time.
Absolutely.
Right.
Even now. I mean, he is. He just always is.
Constantly. He's your constant.
But especially then.
Did you have other supports to help keep you going? I mean, I know you've mentioned a little bit about your mom. I mean, clearly there's been so much stuff that you've sort of, like, you had this depressive episode, right? You had that episode. But when you're talking about food addiction and depression and all of the intricate pieces that showed up about your brother and how that was like the driving force of this episode, what other types of supports did you have?
So I had a group of 3 women and their partners who I would say were a life raft for me. I met them kind of before the episode had started. And I call it an episode now, but when I was in it, you got to understand, like, I did not think this was ever going to end. Right? Like,
it's like this. Yeah.
I just thought this was...
You don't see the light at the end of the tunnel. You don't know that it's there. It just felt like
I just thought this is me now, right? Like, this is just me now. This is going to be my life, and this is who I'm going to be for the rest of my life. I couldn't see that there would ever be an end to this. Trying to figure out the right medication and making sure I went to the gym and like all those things I had to do, and it just felt so difficult. And these 3 women, also therapists, they were just there for me. They were just there. They would check in. They would text me. I remember my one, like, a birthday that I had, and the year before I was, I threw this big paint night party, and it was so glamorous. And then the following year I was wearing my gray toque, right? It's like I couldn't.
You went to your gray toque, right? So they knew.
I did, and they showed up at my house, and we had food. Like, we literally sat on the floor. I couldn't even set a table. Right. We sat on the floor in my living room and we ate, I think, chicken and salad or whatever it was that we had ordered, and they were just there, and they didn't need or ask for anything of me. So those 3, and then another friend I have who I met through the kids' school, and she lived right across the street. And so many days after drop off, she would just invite me over for a cup of tea. And I would just sit on her couch wrapped up in a blanket, and she'd make me peppermint tea, and we would just talk. And she doesn't have depression. And so she was just trying to understand, like, how can I support you? What can I do for you? And seeing her every single day, every single morning, we didn't always have tea every single morning, but we'd walk our kids to school together. And yeah, those particular people that were just there. And my sister also lives with depression. And so she gets it. And so when
Right.
I would feel, like a failure because now I have to take medication, or I would feel frustrated because, the people like my husband and my mom, they didn't really get the whole medication side. They thought I should be able to like think my way through it or something,
Mm-hmm.
pray my way, I don't know. And so I had to take a stand and say, you know what, I've tried everything and I need
Right.
to do this. But yeah, my sister really got it. And she
Mm-hmm.
was, I mean, day or night, she actually took me for a week-long retreat in the mountains to do some like growth, some inner work. And she just like,
Wow.
she dropped everything and just took me. And
That's so
she
nice.
showed up, like she just kept flying in. She lives in Calgary. She just fly into
Right.
Vancouver, hang out for a week or two just to be around.
Wow. Wow.
So I
That's
had
so
lots of
lovely.
support, lots
You
of support.
definitely have support. I'm hearing that you've got support coming out of your wazoo, but which is good.
And the funny thing is, here's the funny thing though, Salima, at the time,
Mm-hmm.
I felt
Mm-hmm.
so alone.
Right.
Even
You
though these
have all
people
these
were,
supports.
even
Right.
though people were reaching out to me, I had this story in my mind that I'm a burden, and it would
Mm-hmm.
be better if I wasn't even here because these people are going through hell because of me. That's the story that the depression
Mm-hmm.
was telling me, right? So it was, though practically and logically speaking, I had these people, I couldn't see it at the time.
I find it so interesting how we can be so blindsided by the narratives that is created in our mind.
Mm-hmm.
Did you experience depression fog? I'm curious about how you would maybe describe that experience if you had depression fog.
Oh my gosh, I totally did. I actually had to step down from so in my faith community, I was involved as a volunteer, and I was actually a member on their national council for mental health, and I
Mm-hmm.
actually had to step down and let my team take over because just composing one email or responding to one
Mm-hmm.
email or being on a
Mm-hmm.
conference call, it was so overwhelming for me. Like I would
Mm-hmm.
have anxiety for 3 hours before the meeting, or like the email would take me an hour to write like 2 or 3 sentences. And I
Yeah.
couldn't, like, I just couldn't cope with any sort of
Mm-hmm.
intellectual engagement or any sort of
Yeah.
problem solving or strategy. I just couldn't do it. I just could not do it. And so I had to say no to, and I had to step down from a lot of things that I was engaged in.
Mm-hmm. You describe what another guest described earlier. She talked about this idea of
Mm-hmm.
impossible task. This definitely sounds like what you're talking about is this impossible task. And I was telling her during our chat that no, it's not about laziness. It's like you literally don't have the capacity to operate in that
I
way.
can't even really get out of bed.
Mm-hmm.
I can't have a shower. Like a shower was an impossible task.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So,
Right.
and even, I'm talking about these friends that would reach out to me, reaching back to them wasn't like texting back
Yeah.
saying,
Yeah.
thank you. I couldn't even do that. And luckily they knew me and they knew what was going on. So they got it. But yeah, everything was so hard.
Everything became tough
And
and
it
hard.
felt like it was never going to end. Just went on and on and on and on and on.
I can't imagine what that was like to be in that one spot of feeling like my life here is on repeat. Nothing's changing. It's going to be like this forever. I don't know what that, I have no idea what that would have been like for you. I mean, it just sounds so tough.
And that I've tried everything. I feel like I've tried everything, right? It's not like I'm just sitting here. I'm going to okay, so I was going to the gym.
Mm-hmm.
And so once in a while I would shower at the gym, to be honest,
Mm-hmm.
because I knew that like physical activity, I just needed it.
Mm-hmm.
So I would go to the gym. The days that I didn't have tea with Aaron, I'd be at the gym, right, in the morning. And so I would do yoga usually or Zumba. Those were my two things that I would do.
Right.
And that was not for health. That was just because I felt better when I went.
Yeah. The endorphins.
Right. So I was going to the gym. People were connecting with me. I was on medication. I was taking walks. Like I was doing all the things and I wasn't getting better.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where that hopeless feeling starts creeping up, right? Like, is this my life now? Is this what it looks like?
Mm-hmm.
I can't live like this. How long am I going to live like this?
Yeah.
And then suddenly we got the right combination of meds and it's like I woke up and I was like, oh, okay, that's what I'm supposed to feel like. Okay, now there's hope. But it took a long time to get there.
Of course. Wow. It's, I mean, you definitely have journeyed through quite the trek. That's for sure. So in the therapy room, Dr. Saira, for me, I often find that individuals are in one of three places when they come to see me. So sometimes people are in a place where they're getting started, some are in the middle, and some are actually looking back. Now, what part of the journey are you in? Would you say that you're looking back? Or are you in the middle, getting started? Where would you place yourself?
I think as far as the depression piece and the conquering the depression, I feel like I'm in the looking back tentatively, right? Like carefully looking back, because there's some mornings where I'm like, uh-oh, is it back? Is it back? And so I'm kind of watching that, but in that area. But when I talk about that relationship with my brother and the pain that started for me, that I feel like I'm still in the middle of it. I'm not on the other side of that yet. It still hurts.
So your journey is like a multi-step journey. So there's like a few stories happening at one time.
There's like layers and levels, and like it feels complicated.
Well, usually our stories they're not simple. And I often find that we have lots of layers because, we tuck it away for so long.
Right.
Right. We face different things, and then different layers or different little pieces get added on, and then they become real fancy. At least they did in my world. But yeah, okay, so you're looking back. And so what do you want to remember about the process of your healing journey?
So I would answer that in two ways. One is the people. And I think of them as this kind of web of support that didn't let me fall, right? They just held on to me. And I remember, I'm getting emotional.
Just take a minute. Yeah.
I remember there was a moment where I was like really suicidal, and I reached out to my cousin and I said to her, I said, can you give me 3 reasons why I shouldn't kill myself? And she said, hold on, I'm calling you, because it was a text.
Right.
And she picked up the phone and we got on FaceTime, and she just talked to me, and she just talked to me and talked to me, because I had sent my husband and my kids, they were going out, and I decided not to go with them. And I was like, okay, this is the night. I'm going to do it. And she brought me back. And when we were talking, one of the metaphors that we came up with was this idea of a red balloon, right? And it's like, it's windy and there's a storm, and I'm holding on to this red balloon, but it's so hard. And I feel like I'm going to let it go. And I don't know what to do. And she said, well, maybe there's more than one string on that balloon, and I'll hold it with you. And so what I did that week was I called all the people who love me, who I know love me, and I asked them, like, will you hold it for me? Will you hold a string? And that was a turning point for me, where like now suicide is off the table. It's not an option anymore, right? Because they have like 15 people or whatever holding my balloon for me, and I can relax and I can just try to get better. I don't have to try to solve this. I just have to make my way through it. I don't even remember your question, Salim. I just went somewhere else with that. No. What am I going to remember? The people.
Yeah,
it's the people. The people.
And the process.
So there's that metaphor of the red balloon. Another metaphor that came up in that workshop that my sister took me to was, I got this image in my mind of a black, dark night with a black, dark lake, and the reflection of the moon in the water. And what I got was, I'm learning to see in the dark. Right? The sun hasn't shone yet. It's not a new day, but I'm learning to see in the dark. And the moon's there for me, even if the sun can't be. And so those two pieces, that everybody holding onto my red balloon and the moon on the lake, those images are what I'm going to remember, I think, from that time of my life.
That is such a great way of looking at it. I really admire the courage even your courage in this whole process, and then just how you've been able to share the metaphors and how you've been able to give yourself some understanding and insight into this. And when you talk about, learning to shine in the dark, right? And the whole piece of the moon versus the sun, and how if the sun can't be there, the moon can. I would have never thought of, anything like that. It's beautiful. That's a really neat way of looking at it. It seems to be a very important aspect of your healing signature.
Well, and also that I think at that time when I was in that brain fog, logic wasn't working. Right? And so I needed symbols and metaphors and images to hold on to, because logic, I could no longer hold on to the logic. It would just slipped away.
Right.
That was really helpful for me in the middle of the depression, was to have those images to hold on to.
Okay, symbols and metaphors is what kept you going.
Mm-hmm.
That is so interesting.
And the people.
And the people. And the people. What would you say that you're grateful for with encountering this journey of your untold story?
I am so grateful that I learned
Mm-hmm.
how to see in the dark, because now I can
Mm-hmm.
help other people navigate that space.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So before, when somebody would talk about suicide, I'd feel a bit like, oh no, I don't know how to help you. But now
Mm-hmm.
I've been to that dark place and I came out of it.
Mm-hmm.
And so I can hold that torch for people. Like I feel like if I hadn't had that experience,
Mm-hmm.
surprisingly, like I'm a better therapist because of it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, because you have this deep knowing now, and your inner voice has so much clarity.
Yeah.
As you said, you found your way back essentially,
Mm-hmm.
right? And if
Yeah.
you found your way back and you have that much clarity, you can now impart that onto someone else or help them and guide them.
Right. Exactly. And that's what I'm really grateful for, is that I had that lived intense experience.
Mm-hmm.
And at the time, if I would not say I was grateful for it at all. But looking back, it's like, okay, we can heal from this. It doesn't have to be the rest of our lives and I'm not, maybe I'll have another depressive episode like that in my lifespan, but I don't think it's ever going to get that bad because of the muscles that I've built because of it.
I was just going to say, it sounds like you've built quite the emotional muscles,
Yeah.
right? Not just one emotional muscle, but several.
Yeah.
Your emotional muscles are built, and you have a solid emotional immune system.
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
And so it doesn't necessarily prevent or make issues like this go away, or that the depression goes away, or that flare-ups and episodes may come still. But it seems like with all of your emotional resilience, with your emotional muscles intact and the emotional immune system like in full charge, you're equipped to manage.
Exactly. And I notice things much earlier now, right? It doesn't
Yes.
get that bad.
Yeah, the noticing.
So when I notice I notice something, I'm just kind of off. So I'm like, okay, I need to stop going to bed so late because look what's happening. Or I need to get back outside and take those walks because I'm slipping, right? So I can catch it much earlier now.
There's so much more awareness.
Yeah.
Anything else that you're grateful for?
I'm grateful, actually, during that time, I was a beaver leader for Scouts Canada. And those little kids, I am so grateful for them. They just made me smile. And I know I keep saying like I was in bed all the time, but I guess I was doing stuff. Because as I talk about it, I'm like, oh wait, I was a scout leader and I was like seeing clients, and so I was doing things, but in my mind I was just in bed the whole time. So Scouts was every Saturday for an hour and a half. And those kids, like, they're seeing the world for 90 minutes through the eyes of a 5-year-old was just such a blessing for me. It was like a relief. It was like one moment in the week where I didn't have to feel, I could just let go and be in the moment and not worry about, am I going to get better?
Right.
So I'm really grateful for all those little ones for those couple of years, for sure.
So Dr. Saira, we have talked about so many different aspects of your untold story and all the different elements that are part of it. And we talked about how there was this time where you were contemplating suicide, and there were a lot of moments where your mental health was really compromised. Can you say more about how your mental health was affected going through all of this?
I feel like the whole thing is just one big ball of mental health problems, right? It's like every part of my life was like, every part of my mental health and well-being was affected. So I couldn't really see logically or reasonably what was available to me. I had the brain fog. I had this anxiety. My anxiety was just so intense and incredible. Like, it was just everything was making me everything. So my second TED Talk, I was like pretty much having panic attacks all the way there, 4-hour drive. And then my family had to kind of sweep me off the stage as soon as I was done, because I was so anxious. And I think I told you this. I forgot my speech. I forgot my TED Talk in the middle of the talk.
Wow.
Yeah. If you watch the talk, you'll see this one moment where there's a long pause. That was me forgetting my TED Talk.
You see, Dr. Sarah, I have seen both your TED Talks on more than one occasion, and I don't recall this pause that you talk about. Like, like I wonder if this pause is just bigger, like more, like much
In my
grander
mind.
in your mind. Because, whenever I do see people pausing, I don't even recall a pause from you. And if you did, I don't think it was like any other pause that where you take a breath or you're like pointing to something or looking around.
And I remember thinking in the moment, don't look like you've forgotten. Just keep your face neutral and just do whatever. Do it. Right?
I mean, I feel like you want me to go back and look, but I'm not going to. Because I'm just not going to do that. It was not obvious.
From the mental health piece. Like I couldn't keep things in my mind. I couldn't plan for my future. I just felt this constant sense of dread all the time for everything. Like even a phone call, like everything made me feel this sense of dread and so much guilt, just so much guilt of what I felt like I was putting my family through.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Is that what you mean when you asked me how my mental health was affected?
Yeah. Just curious as like what else had impacted, what was going on for you, like what sort of emotions did you sort of take on noticing? And you just mentioned guilt and all of these things they're all related.
Mm-hmm. Hopelessness, guilt, overwhelm.
Right.
Sometimes anger, like just real anger at God.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Because I'm like, hello, you're supposed to be here and fix things and nothing's getting fixed here.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think I had a bit of a crisis of faith. And one of the books that I held on to, again, like a life raft, was a book called The Dark Night of the Soul by Thomas More.
Yeah.
And I had read that years ago, but I revisited it during the depressive episode. And it was like, okay, like be here with the darkness and see what's here for you.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so that reframe, I think I had to do a lot of those reframes, and that kind of kept those moments, like my mental health improved for a minute and then it would go back. And then, so it was like basically awful, except for a few moments of insight here and there.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. When you say it that way, it totally makes sense. Awful with few moments of insight.
Mm-hmm.
I'm curious about like if you noticed anything else that impacted your mental health. Like I know that we talked a little bit about your brother and we talked about how he greeted his friends or those other people that he was hanging out with. And when you realized that you weren't his person and you couldn't fix him maybe, did you have any sort of aha epiphany moment, even if it wasn't like a bright light aha moment? Did you have some other sort of revelation for yourself, not about his story, but about yours? Did anything connect there for you?
So in my family system, they call me Baji, which means eldest sister. And it's a title, it's a role in the family. In Urdu, the language is Urdu, Baji. And in that moment, I felt like I stopped being Baji. I stopped being like the dependable older sister who's going to help you get out of a jam, because I couldn't do it.
Did you feel demoted?
Well, it felt more like, not even demoted, more like it was just stripped from me. And now I had to create a new identity, just stripped.
Right. Okay.
Right? It's like I was just naked suddenly and I had to figure out who I am if I'm not the big sister.
Mm-hmm. So when you had that revelation, that moment of like, wow, it all got stripped.
Yeah.
That was still you feeling this idea that you had to be this dependable older sister, this dependable daughter, this dependable family member.
Yeah.
At what point did that sort of pivot to focusing on you?
Well, when I got to the point where I couldn't care about anybody else, right, where I just didn't have the bandwidth to take on anybody else's. And it happened very soon after this incident, like probably a couple of weeks later, where I was like, I can't even look after myself. How am I going to look after anybody else? Like I couldn't look after my children. And so kind of when I look back on it, it feels like kind of I started actually getting to know myself in a new way. Because most of my life, like I talk about the Cinderella story, right? Most of my life, I was that like good little girl that did what she was told and, achieved a high achiever and getting lots of accolades. But there was this whole other side to me, this whole like ocean of despair inside of me that I had never acknowledged or admitted to. And so the journey inward happened because of my depression. Right? It wasn't about service to others. It wasn't about giving on the outside. It wasn't about putting on a show. It was about like what is happening inside of me, and that's all I can pay attention to right now. And then
Mm-hmm.
and then coming out of it and having to come back into a bit of balance where it's like not all about me all the time.
Mm-hmm.
I can be there with others, but at that time it had to be.
You faced your demons.
Well, yeah, that's it. I had to turn inward, and there was a
Mm-hmm.
lot of nasty demons in there. A lot.
Wow. Mm-hmm.
Like they almost defeated me, but they didn't.
But they didn't. I was just going to say, nice try, demons. Didn't get Dr. Saira.
Yeah, and I remember going to a funeral of a person who had ended their life, just as I was coming out of my depression at the tail end. And somebody from my place of worship who kind of knew that I was depressed, didn't really know the details, but knew that, I was showing up in sweatpants and my gray toque to our place of worship whenever I could make it. She just hugged me and she held me and she said, "Thank God that's not you." And it just broke the dam. I just realized like, oh my God, if I had done that, that could have been me.
Right.
And it was like a wake up call. Like, oh, right. This is a real, like, people know me and they love me and they want me to be here. And that means something.
You do mean something, clearly.
Well, I know that now.
Yeah. but it's so great that there was a person there who also recognized it at the time to help bring you back to that recognizing for yourself.
And she was just kind of a stranger, like one of those familiar faces that you see, but I barely even knew her name, right? But I guess she'd been observing me or watching me, and that moment, like she saw something that
had compassion and empathy, and she risked to do what she had to do to share with you.
Yeah.
And whether she knows how impactful she was to you or not in that moment, what a blessing.
Absolutely.
Wow. Now, what's your key message to the listeners of our show?
I think my key message is that it's not going to last forever.
Mm-hmm.
That even in the darkest night, there can be still the moon shining. So like, look for that light, look for the moon, look for those people. It's not going to last forever. Even if it feels like it's lasting, it has lasted forever. Eventually we come out of it. And we come out changed.
Come out of it changed.
Yeah.
Any other messages for the listeners?
What helped me, again, was the people. So just pay attention to the people that are there. There are people there. If we just look around and stop listening to our crazy, thoughts, tell us we're a burden, and if you look around, there are people there. And so those people can be that safety net for you if you remember that they're there for you. So reach out and connect to someone. At the last moment, when it was almost too late, before I did it, I reached out to someone, anyone. And I actually had called probably like 10 or 12 people before I got to her, before somebody picked up the phone.
It's like you almost knew. You knew what to do.
Yeah, that a person is going to help me through this. I can't do this on my own.
You did have some trust and faith there.
Yeah, not in God, but in people. I've repaired my relationship with God now, but it was rocky there for a while, I will tell you.
Right. Absolutely. So I'm curious about... what is your game changer inspiration that's close to you that reflects your untold story? So is there like an inspirational book or a quote or something?
So the quote that I came up with for my practice, actually, which I was applying to myself, is change your story, change your life. I was telling myself I was this like depressed person rather than a warrior on a journey. So that would be like a motto or a quote. The book, there's two books. One is the one I mentioned before, The Dark Nights of the Soul, The Dark Night of the Soul. And the second is a book by Dr. James Gordon called Unstuck. And in there, he talks about all these other things you can do when you're depressed to help get you out. And he has a bit of a spiritual perspective as well. Like it's all kind of based in the science and the research. And he also brings in that thing around meaning, right? Because I think the challenge with depression is there's this crisis of meaning. What does my life mean? And so that book Unstuck really helped me as well.
That's really great that you were able to lean on these readings to help you get to where you are now. That's great. And so what is a cause or an organization that's been impactful to you on your journey that you would like to give a shout out to? I think that you've mentioned Rumblings of Canadian Mental Health Association and Scouts Canada, but you tell me.
So I would say those two, CMHA and Scouts Canada. And the big one for me was Bright Line Eating. And so Bright Line Eating is the program that I went to face my food addiction. The founder is a neuroscientist and a psychologist. So it's not just about weight loss, right? It's about your whole life and how you relate to food and how we use food. And so it was really kind of like an emotional journey of weight loss, not just a physical journey, which then led to like right, all of my feelings coming up and all that, but but it's still 4 years later I've kept off the weight, right? And I've been heavy my whole life, and finally I found something that didn't make me feel ashamed of what was happening in my body, and also gave me like a solution that I will hold on to this for the rest of my life. Like I will eat this way for the rest of my life, and I enjoy my food and I celebrate food, and yet I'm not gaining weight. And it's just that Bright Line Eating program, because when I was that depressed in the past, like I would have probably gained like 40 pounds or something, because eating used to help me feel better. But because I wasn't eating, and I had something else to hold on to with the 4 lines that she talks about, because I could hold on to that, I didn't also add another problem of now gaining weight.
Right.
You know what I mean? So that would be the one, I think, in addition to the other two that I mentioned, Bright Line Eating.
Okay, thank you for sharing that with us. And so how can people connect with you? You know, if there's anyone who really is drawn by what you've taken so much courage to share today, someone wants to connect with you, how are you findable?
So pretty much if you Google me, you'll find me. So I have a YouTube channel, I'm on Instagram. The best way is through my website, because if somebody contacts me through my website, it'll like come straight to my inbox.
What's your website?
drsaira.ca, so DRSAIRA.ca.
Perfect. And then you're also findable on Instagram, LinkedIn, Facebook.
Yeah, so
Twitter.
It's my handle is Dr. Saira Cares, and my YouTube channel is Dragonfly Wellness TV.
Okay. So, Dr. Saira, I know you've dared yourself a few times now. However, you just dared yourself to share again. And from what I think and my experience of today's conversation is you shared in a different way. Congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you so much for this opportunity. I never thought about ever sharing these stories like in a public way. And so if my story can help anybody, even one person, one listener, to know that you're not alone, it will get better. I've walked in the dark too, and it made me different. And I think in some ways it made me better. I think if you can get that as a listener, like then we've done our work, right, Salima?
I think so. Absolutely. Dr. Saira, I want to extend my gratitude again for your willingness to do this. Your sharing today was real, showing up with so much authenticity. You know, it's just truly a reminder of how much more you can learn about someone's untold story, and particularly what you've been through. I feel like every time we have a conversation, you still learn something new. So it was very eye-opening for me. And through your story, it personally inspires me to be better and do better, and remind myself that, you know, if I'm ever in a time where I feel like I'm in a loop, that I can break that cycle. And so that reminder from you is also brilliant. And today, you trusted your own process, so I thank you for that level of vulnerability. Just the ways that you opened up and shared with such detail, and the articulation of how your story unfolded, you know, with talking about how there's this episode and talking about with your brother and all of the things that happened after the TED Talk and all of the things that happened even before the TED Talk, and just where it has led you to this present day. It's admirable. So thank you, Dr. Saira, for being a part of Dare to Share Your Untold Story and helping to be a voice in breaking down the barriers of mental stigma.
Thank you so much for having me, Salima.
To all of our listeners, if you like what you've been hearing on this podcast and you want to be part of breaking down barriers of mental stigma, I invite you to go wherever you are listening to the episode and hit subscribe. Leave us a comment or a review of the episode and maybe how you relate to it. To learn more about what we offer, visit www.daretoheal.co. And if you are feeling ready and brave to share, please submit your story by visiting www.daretoshare.co. Thanks for joining in.